Welcome to the show today, guys. Thank you for tuning back in. We are coming to you from Washington, D.C. once again for the 2023 March for Life, the first March for Life since the overturning of Roe versus Wade, which means there's a lot of unpredictable things. We don't know how many pro-lifers are going to come out or how angry the Moloch serviles and abortion demons are, and whether they'll rear their ugly head or not. A lot of unpredictable things, but it's very important for pro-lifers to be here at such a monumentous moment in American history. The first year without Roe v. Wade since 1973, the 50th anniversary of what would have been the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade approaching in just a few days from now. And so we're here on the ground and we're doing interviews with just wonderful pro-life leaders and people who have experienced the culture of death in a very real way. And as you've heard me share on this show before with Melissa Ohden and other abortion survivors and friends of the Abortion Survivors Network, I believe that one of the keys to winning in the court of public opinion, which will yield, of course, the change in policy, is the voice of abortion survivors. And I'm not talking about women who had abortion. Sometimes people confuse that. They think, I'm an abortion survivor. I had an abortion. It's like, no. I mean, the baby that survived the botched abortion that was attempted to dismember them. And so if you've been listening to this podcast for some time, you've heard some of the stories of abortion survivors. And I believe their voice is so important because it causes liberalism and abortion ideology to collapse in on itself like a dying star, if you will. If the baby is allowed to escape the forceps intended to disembowel them, and then they're allowed, without the will of every Democrat in the House except one, who just shot down the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, if they're allowed to escape the prison of Democrat policies and then grow and become an adult and find their voice, nothing strikes more fear into the heart of the abortion industrial complex than babies who were marked for death surviving, growing, and being a voice against the culture of death, because they're a walking contradiction and they weren't allowed to live. They weren't supposed to have a voice. And so I have my new friend on the podcast today, Sarah Zagorski, the communications director for Louisiana Right to Life. Of course, she's in the pro-life battle. And we have her on the show today to tell her story and talk about some of the insanity going on in DC. And I think the Democrats really going the extra measure to say the quiet part out loud and prove how evil they are. And so I think it's very important for us to have this conversation. So buckle up. You're in for a treat. I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted. Sarah, welcome to the show today.
I'm so glad to be here with you. It's an honor. I was just here last week in DC again.
Yeah. I was just here last week, but in Arlington. I got a last minute request to speak at a Catholic high school, actually.
Oh, awesome. That's awesome.
In Arlington, but it must have been 1,500 or more students. And I was surprised I got the invite because big Catholic high schools, unfortunately, tend to stay away from some of these issues because, a lot of people, they like the credentialism and the respectability of a private Catholic education. But a lot of the parents and students aren't actually practicing Catholics.
Right.
So they don't risk bringing in pro-life speakers. So they had me in, and then I got an email from a parent who heard from his son about my talk, and he loved it. This parent emailed me. He was so stoked I was there. But then in his email, Sarah, he said, except my son just told me the day after you were there, the principal got on the school speaker and apologized for how political yesterday's speaker was. And I was like, isn't that why we're in this position we're in? Because those who say they're pro-life will spend more time apologizing for their beliefs than staring the culture of death in the eye and being as passionate for truth, for righteousness, for life, as they have been for death and evil. But you know all about the culture of death
I do.
And staring death and evil into the eye. Unfortunately, of course. Unfortunately, goodness gracious. But we just got introduced through our friend Melissa Ohden.
We did, yes.
Of course, who's the founder and director of the Abortion Survivors Network. And you guys are friends. You guys just appeared on Fox and Friends together.
We did.
And told your story.
We did. It was amazing.
So, but before we get to current stuff, I just think, and it's hard, I'm sure, but I'm sure you get asked a lot. And I know sometimes it's hard for abortion survivors who probably feel sometimes like the pro-life movement treats them as just like a testimony to kind of bolster their message. But you're a human being, and you barely escaped the instruments intended to murder you.
Yes.
And so I think it's just so important for the culture, well, for everyone, the pro-abortionists, the apathetics, and the church, Christians who say they're pro-life, but do very little.
Right, it needs to be real for them.
It needs to be real for them. Beautifully said.
Yes.
So Sarah, tell us, start however you feel comfortable,
Sure.
but what's your story?
Yeah, I always start with my birth mother's story. She was an immigrant from Honduras. She came to America on a boat as a teenager.
Wow.
She had 7 children before she had me. Yes. And she lived in...
She brought her children with her?
Oh, well, she had the children in Louisiana where she came. But
Wow.
she was in a couple abusive relationships. She had a very traumatic past. And she was also post-abortive. She had 2 abortions prior to her.
Already?
Yes, correct.
Wow.
So she's just a very broken woman. And she was referred to a chief physician in New Orleans named Dr. Akpalabi, who was known for helping minority women, poor minority women with their problems, right?
Yeah.
So he delivered me what's called an induced abortion procedure and delivered me at 26 and a half weeks. When I was born, I wasn't breathing.
26 and a half weeks.
Correct.
Which even then was considered past the age of viability.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is a very stupid
Absolutely.
medical concept that is more of a gauge of our current medical technology than it is the status of the child.
I have so many thoughts on fetal viability.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Yes. So wait, why was your mother going in for an abortion?
Yes,
it was just it was an induced.
Yes, induced. Yes,
Wow.
correct. And
And tell us how that works for the people who don't understand the various methods of killing babies in the womb.
Sure. So there's many different types of abortion procedures. This would be considered a late-term abortion procedure, where they induce the mother early and then wait for the baby to die or kill the baby with it. Back in the day, partial birth abortion through scissors in the back of the neck.
Because I forgot, and I apologize.
Before the Bush era.
It'll probably come to me in 1 minute, but I forget the year that partial birth abortions were banned.
It was during Bush.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Although they're still exercising them in the city we're in right now.
Absolutely.
And you know all about the Washington, D.C. Surgery Clinic.
Yes.
That some friends of ours, one of very close friend of mine, obtained buckets.
Yes.
From the driver of a van of a vendor company that is paid by Santangelo, the baby murderer in D.C., to remove and take the mutilated baby parts after an abortion. And shockingly, this hasn't happened in decades in the pro-life movement. Last year, this driver was convinced by the sidewalk counselors to give them the buckets of aborted children. And my friend A.J. Hurley was there when they opened these containers. And he held the children whose heads, some of whom were collapsed in, just like a baby would look if they were killed through partial birth abortion. So was that the procedure that was intended to be performed on you?
It was intended just to leave me to die. So what happened in my case was I wasn't breathing already when I was born. And he told my mother that I'd be a mental vegetable, incapable of having a normal life. And she should just let me...
Incapable of what?
Having a normal life.
Thank you because that's the language of eugenicist, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Very much so.
They get to determine the quality of life standard.
Right.
And if you don't meet their subjective standard of a quality of life, then it's probably better to just let you die. What do they call it? Incompatible?
Yes, incompatible with life. And that's a huge issue in Louisiana right now, actually. But the interesting thing about I've learned about abortion physicians is they like to play that role of God so very often to determine when someone's life is valuable or worth living or can overcome. They think they have that role and they just can't make life and death determinations that way.
That's right.
So amazingly in my case, and I'm so thankful to my mother's bravery because of her past abortion regret, because she saw me on the table there, she said, I'm going to sue you if you don't get my daughter medical care.
Whoa.
Which at the time for Dr. Akpalabi was persuasive because in 1989, the year before I was born, he was facing review by Louisiana's medical board for performing a botched procedure on a woman, and he was in the risk of losing his licensure. All of it was bad timing for him. So he decided to send me to Children's Hospital in New Orleans, where I was stayed in a trauma ward. And probably, unfortunately for him, fortunately for me, I did survive.
Wow. How long were you there?
Months. Yeah.
Months.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
26 and a half weeks.
Yeah.
So had things gone as they were supposed to, that type of abortion would have entailed at the time either partial birth or
leaving me to die.
Digoxin.
Yes.
Would they be using digoxin or potassium chloride at 26 and a half weeks to kill a baby?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
So that so had things gone right, quote unquote, he would have either shoved a needle into your skull or head and injected.
Well, he wouldn't have even had to do all that because I was already close to death. So,
Jeez.
but yes.
Wow.
Very sad, but very thankful for my mother's courage at the end, which is what matters in the end, is that she chose life. And
so what happened to Sarah after you were in the into the the preemie?
Yes,
ward?
so this is what I get into often because I share my story all around the country. But I did eventually go home, and my mother quickly had 3 more children. So I'm one of 11.
One of 11.
Yes, one of 11.
Wow.
And I entered foster care for the first time at 16 months.
Wow.
And I was in and out of foster care for almost 8 years prior to my adoption at age 9 by an amazing pro-life family. And that family really proved to me that the pro-life movement is not what secular media paints it to be. They are not a movement that say, have your baby, but I'm not going to be there for you after. It's like quite the opposite. And I'm a testimony to that. My life story is a testimony to that. The difficult part about my story, I think at times, and I think the pro-abortion movement hates this part of my story, is I experienced in childhood all the things that pro-abortion activists say are reasons you should abort. Child poverty, parental neglect, abuse, my mother's inability to take care of us. She had a lot of mental health problems. I experienced all these things,
like
right?
Every checkbox thing.
Right, exactly. I was also the product of an affair. So, so many complexities, right?
Do you have a lot of memories being in and out of foster care?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Because 9, that's a long time.
Yeah, it was a long time. And also in that process, I saw this deep suffering she experienced from her past abortions, the deep trauma she had been through, but also how the pro-abortion movement preys on women like her. And it's disgusting.
Yep.
It's disgusting. Because they want to say that the solution to her problems would have been killing me. It was killing her other babies. But you know what? None of those abortions before with me brought her any good. It only brought her trauma and pain and furthered her suffering, which is what we know.
Yeah. Shocker.
Yeah.
Well, and there's been lots of research into abortion's relationship to mental health, preterm birth in subsequent pregnancies, and breast cancer.
Yes.
And those are the 3 things that the abortion industry denies until their dying breath. They say there is 0 proof that abortion leads to any one of those things. But we have the studies. We have
they
the
want to
evidence.
hide that. They absolutely want to hide that. And they've been lying to women for...
For example, there's just to bolster your own point. There's a book by the National Academy of Science, NAS, pro-abortion group. And it's called Abortion Effects or something like this, but the book denies, the whole book is written by the pro-abortion lobby, and it denies that there's any proof or link between abortion and then mental health, breast cancer, or preterm birth in future pregnancies. Between, I believe it was the 1980s and 2015, there were 75 studies that examined the relationship between abortion and mental health. 50 of the 75 found a overwhelming positive connection between abortion and a woman's mental health afterwards. The National Academy of Science book examined 7 studies total to argue that there is no proof that there is a link between abortion and mental health.
Right.
All 7 of those came from the 25 that said there was no link, compared to the 50 that said there was an overwhelming. Anyways, all that to say, they've been saying follow the science for a long time, not just the last few years of COVID.
They don't want to follow the science.
Follow the science. Follow the science.
They don't want to follow fetal science either.
They don't want to acknowledge the science of embryology.
No.
They don't want to acknowledge any of the science that proves this. And so, but you encountered and experienced a lot of that.
I did.
Suffering and mental health and
absolutely. And I saw
struggles.
It destroyed my mother's life, basically. And I think that I speak for other abortion survivors like myself, but also for women who are preyed upon. I call my mother what I would say is like a prototype of a woman who chooses abortion. Poor, minority, a lot of social problems. And they're vulnerable to an industry that looks to make money off of them. It's disgusting. And that's that's the culture of death you're talking about. That's their pursuit. That's their chief goal. That was Dr. Pahlavi's chief goal. He did not care about my mother. He did not care about the well-being of her children at home. He had no interest in caring about any of those things.
Yep. Myra Rodriguez, who's a former staffer for Planned Parenthood. I think she was the clinic director. I had her on the podcast over a year ago. And she tells some horror stories of Planned Parenthood clinics, centers, preying on illegal immigrants and saying, well, if you go to the hospital, if you go to that pregnancy center, if you go to that obstetrician gynecologist over there, they're going to report you and you're going to have to go back home. So just come over here. We'll take care of you. Literally preying on them with threat of deportation in order to kill their child, knowing that they'll be subsidized through the state at a greater rate than they would with a cash patient.
Wow.
So, I mean, we have all the stories from people who have been on the other side and thankfully have come to the pro-life side. But wow. So you were adopted.
I was adopted by an amazing a Christian family. And they were close friends at different points with my birth mother. And they tried to help her every chance they could. They tried to help her with post-abortive healing. They tried to help her get custody of her kids back. They tried to provide her, they threw birthday parties for my siblings. They went out of their way to try to support her.
Wow.
And that was without a guarantee of any adoption, because, the goal of foster care, and I always say this, is never, people think, oh, foster care is for adoption. Foster care is for reunification with the birth family.
Even when it's not in the best interest of the child. Usually.
And I'm a big advocate for children that go through long processes of trying to reunify unsuccessfully, and it causing them more pain and heartache than necessary. Yeah. So, but I then, in my Christian family, my adopted mom was post-abortive, as I mentioned, and she did sidewalk counseling with Silent No More, and did a lot of healing ministries like Rachel's Vineyard. She did some rescue type things back in the day, and she'd tell you that proudly. So I was introduced to the pro-life movement very fast and very quickly. Got to see all of it in the early 90s, and then, the late 90s and later on. So that was awesome. And then I went to college in 2012, graduated in degree in communications at that time, and decided that I didn't want to do pro-life ministry. I was going to run away from it. And of course, God was like, just kidding. You're not going to do that. So that's the short version.
So did you start with Louisiana Right to Life?
All right, out of college, yes.
Okay,
I did an internship with Focus on the Family when I was in college. So I was in college from 2008 to 2012. And then right from out of college, I went to Louisiana Right to Life.
So I know, having spoken to some other abortion survivors, how difficult it can be to begin telling your story.
It's very difficult.
To get vulnerable,
it's very difficult,
especially in a culture of death that not only celebrates, Sarah, but funds and requires tax dollars to fund the very act that nearly took your life. Right. I mean, I talk about this a lot with Melissa Oden, to live under an administration that daily celebrates the act that nearly took your life and tells you have no right to live and you need to shut up. And so when Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley invite you to come onto the Hill, we're not going to stare at you. We're not going to look at you. We're going to ignore you. And we're going to direct all questions to the abortion supporters that came for this panel or this subcommittee and none to you. To live with that kind of hatred. Because I always tell people, I often say, you need to understand these people hate babies. They hate the preborn because they believe they should have orgasms without responsibility. And people kind of, sneer and laugh when I speak like that. It's like, they don't, come on, nobody hates babies. It's just healthcare, and sometimes the mom's not in the best place. It's like, no, you don't understand. There is a hatred for the preborn because they get in the way of our selfish lifestyle. Right. I think at the root level, if we're going to go all the way down, I mean, really, if we go all the way down, Sarah, I think we have to call it the sacrament of Satan.
Right.
That this is the sacrament of an alternative religion. But just above that bottom layer, I think at one of the most fundamental levels of this debate is the belief that we have the right to make difficult life problems just go away, even if that problem is a person.
Right.
And so I have no place in my consciousness and life experience to place what you and other abortion survivors must go for. I mean, I experience vitriol and hatred. I mean, I go into university campuses like,
yes,
but it's something different. It's something different to be stared at by people who believe you should be dead. I don't know what I would do with that or how I would manage living under that weight every day. So can you just like speak to that for people who are pro-life, but maybe they're listening to this, Sarah, and they're new to the pro-life fight. Maybe a pastor or an elder is listening to this and their church hasn't done much. Like help people listening to this to understand what that's like to have survived an attempt to murder you in the womb, have spent months in a preemie ward trying to recover from the act that nearly took your life, and then live in a culture that celebrates and forces Americans to fund the death of similar babies like you who barely survived.
Yeah.
And in a church that says, oh, we don't do politics. We just preach the gospel, Sarah. While you're here pleading for them to have been speaking for you then. Like, just help us understand what that's like. I can't imagine.
I would say it's soul crushing. It's soul crushing because, you know, it takes a lot for a person to heal from that experience, right? For one.
Oh,
two.
When did you learn?
Oh, I learned from my birth mother.
Yeah, tell that story because that's part of that's part of your same answer as to
She told me that she was naive and scared and thought she had no other choice. About 7 or 8.
Oh, that's young.
Yeah, and then
whoa. Your birth mother told you at 7 or 8.
Yeah, my birth mother. Oh, and then, you know, I talked to my adoptive mother later about it. And, you know, she didn't want to be the person to tell me because she didn't think it was her place. But also she didn't want me to feel rejected and feel like I wasn't loved. It's a lot of pain. It's a lot of trauma to experience. Thankfully, I was able to have a redemptive conversation with my birth mother before she passed away. She passed away in 2010 when I was in college. And she did apologize to me and explained that what we hear all the time was that she felt coerced. She felt she had no choice to do anything different than what she did. My birth father had abandoned her, had nothing to do with me at all. And that's what led her to that decision. But yes, very soul crushing. I would say I had a really powerful encounter. I visited, I don't know if you remember Dr. Tiller in Wichita, Kansas, right? Yeah. I visited his abortion facility.
He was the one who was murdered, right?
Correct. He was assassinated.
He was shot by a pro-lifer.
Yeah, that's what they say. He was a lone gunman. It was not like someone actually connected to the pro-life movement.
The pro-life movement has always condemned
absolutely
the murder of abortionists.
Right.
But it's so funny. They use those 1 or 2 incidents of someone who killed an abortionist.
Oh, you see it in all those articles.
They cry bloody murder. I'm like, listen, I'm not condoning that for anyone listening to this, right? But I'm just saying, like, really?
Yes.
You're going to get your panties in a wad now, abortion industry, and talk about the injustice of this? Shut up.
Yes.
You literally have profited billions off of slaughtering the innocent. And now your panties are in a wad because a murderer was murdered. Again, I'm not saying people should go out and shoot abortionists, but it's so ludicrous.
Well, and they use it as trying to shift blame, you know, like, oh, we kill babies, but y'all kill.
So you were talking about Tiller,
so I was with my adopted mom and I visited his facility, and on his facility, he had a crematorium on his grounds.
Why were you visiting it?
We were doing a summer missions trip there.
Okay.
Yes.
So like a pro-life missions trip.
Yes, correct. This was around 2001, I want to say.
Okay, so you
I was like 11 years old.
Okay. Wow.
And I had come to some understanding of what my birth mother's story was, but he had a crematorium on his grounds where he burned the bodies of the babies he killed in barbaric late-term abortions. He also, I don't know if you knew this, I'm sure you did, but he also had baptized these babies and had pictures of himself with some priest of some kind with the dead babies. I mean, my adopted mom had pictures of these. I saw them myself. So anyway, I'm standing there.
Let me just pause you again.
I know, it's so much. It's so much.
I try to arrange my words in countless different arrangements to get people to rattle their conscience.
Yeah.
I'm renowned for being like a little bit more of a spicy pro-life speaker. So people either love me or hate me because of that. But I'm not this like sweet, polished Lila Rose. Like, and I adore Lila, but like
Yeah.
But it's because I'm always trying to find the spiciest arrangement to communicate, to rattle people's consciousness, to say like, do you understand? Do you see? Because most people don't understand the wickedness and the demonic nature of the fight against abortion. Like, let me just repeat what Sarah just said, guys. I don't know if you caught that. And he's not the only one to have done things like this.
Correct.
Abortionists who either burn the bodies of their babies. Some of them have collected them. And I covered this in my podcast all the time. Well, not just Gosnell, but there was this other dude a year and a half ago I covered on the podcast. I can't remember his name.
Oh, yes. I remember the case now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And after he passed, his wife found boxes and bottles of all the children he had killed. Some of them had dates on them, Sarah, that said like the 90s.
Yes, I remember this.
And then some of those women who he performed, well, abortions are performed on babies, not on mothers, but who went in for the abortion were like reliving this trauma because they discovered that was their baby he had kept.
Yeah.
Other abortionists have advertised services, and Jill Stanek exposed this years ago. I haven't had the privilege of meeting Jill in person, but she interviewed me when I was at Westmont when I was holding dead baby photo signs of abortion. To bring awareness to the fact that my Christian alma mater hires pro-abortion professors and all this stuff. And so Jill Stanek and I talked like back in 2012, but it's been ages. I don't know if she'd remember me, but she exposed some of this at the Virginia hospital she was a nurse at. That they were performing abortions, but then they were giving women. It was either at the hospital or an abortion center, but services where you basically get to take a picture and they dress up the murdered baby and then the mom gets to take a picture of the baby she paid someone to murder. And now you've got Tiller who was baptizing murdered babies. I mean, anyways, I'm just repeating what you said for people listening and giving some other examples of like, if this doesn't wake you up to how demonic this is, like, I don't know what will. If they believed it was a blob of tissue, right, Sarah? What do they call it? Pregnancy tissue?
Right.
If they believed that, they wouldn't behave like this.
Right.
Anyways, so you were there. You were visiting the crematorium that he burned babies.
Well, yes. Okay, so I'm standing on the sidewalk with my adopted mom, and I have these white papers in my hand. And she had her sign. She carried a sign. I regret my abortion. Please come talk to me. That was one of her signs that she carried then. And I remember something that looked like dirt falling on the paper, and I was like, "Mom, why is there dirt falling on my paper?" And she said, "Sarah, that's not dirt. That's from the babies that's the ashes in the air from the babies he kills inside." And it was like in that moment, everything like I began to realize how close my life was to literal ashes. Like it was a life-changing moment for me, truly. It's when I would say I knew deep from the Lord and in my own life that this was going to be my mission to end this wickedness. Like it was going to be my mission. I committed to it then. So even though I at times wrestled with the trauma and the pain and sorting through it and my mother's death and all these different things, I can't take back that experience and being like, knowing that my life was very close to death just like that.
Wow. Well, I mean, it reminds me of the ashes of the Jews floating into the air from a concentration camp and falling onto the steeples of local churches. Who were too busy singing their hymns to be bothered.
And maybe that's what the soul crushing part is, right? Like it takes people like Melissa and more so Melissa, because she's been in the public eye so much internal strength to have to get up and go face to face with the culture of death. Because we're saying you have to see me when they want to pretend I never existed at all.
And that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast, Sarah, and why I always extend an invitation to abortion survivors to come on the podcast, because as you know, most people who even call themselves pro-life, Christian or not, have no sense of this battle. They have no sense for what the fight is like. And you know that, I know that. And that's coming from people who call themselves pro-life. Who have no sense of what the fight is really like. Now imagine being one of the pro-choice moderates in America, right? When I say pro-choice moderate, I mean like you're not on board with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer's views, like you don't want abortion through point of birth, but you probably support it up through somewhere in the second trimester. Now imagine you're being that person. You're even more disconnected from the nature of what this fight is really like and what this issue really means. And so I sometimes use an analogy like imagine being a rape victim. Imagine having survived rape. Maybe you were impregnated by the rapist, maybe you weren't. Just imagine for a second, guys, if you're listening to this, imagine the Democrat Party is proposing legislation not just to legalize rape so men can go back to treating women like property, but they're forcing you to actually fund centers and brothels that allow men to rape and enjoy women to whatever extent they want, and then leaving them. And then that's actually called a man's right. You see, this is a bodily autonomy issue. Women used to be viewed and treated as property. Actually, for in many civilizations for a long time until that whole thing called the Christ, Jesus, and that whole thing called Christianity started elevating how women were treated, as an image bearer of God and an equal. So this is not outside of the realm of imagination. No. Imagine what that would be like. Maybe if you're listening to this, you have been raped and you have survived a rape. Just imagine for a second what that would be like to live under an administration and in a culture that celebrates the act you were forced to endure, and then tells you need to shut up and take it. On top of that, can you imagine after the believe all women thing we just had a couple years ago, Can you imagine what that would be like?
The Me Too movement.
Well, guess what? We do have it. Yeah. The issue is actually just worse than rape, because you see, rape doesn't always murder its victims. Abortion nearly always murders its victims. Right. Absolutely. And you were the exception. You luckily escaped.
Yes.
But you're not the majority. The majority of babies are killed through abortion. The majority of babies don't survive that abortion. And now you have to live in a culture and society that says, shut up. Don't tell your story because it compromises our movement.
Well, they completely ignore us altogether.
Tell us some stories. What's that been like? Because you've been in the pro-life movement for some time now. I mean, you work at Louisiana Right to Life. So you're not new to this fight and this battle.
No.
Do you have, enlighten us.
Sure. So, interestingly, I have, even within my family, I have family members who, on my adopted family side, that will tell me, well, you're an exception. We're so glad you're here with us and we love you. But we don't believe in taking away a woman's right to have control over her own body. Man. And it's like, you think that is sufficient for someone like me?
Do you just rip them a new one?
I try so hard not to, but it's
Will you have my
difficult.
Blessings and permission to rip them a new one?
It's very difficult, because what's surprising, and this is from someone or from people who I know love me, can say that. If that's what's so surprising, is in the culture of death out in the public, they don't even see that you exist. They definitely would rather you be dead.
Well, you know what their response often is? They actually will say that you're lying.
Oh, right.
One of the most common responses of the pro-abortion movement when abortion survivors tell their stories is, yeah, right, you're making that up. And
tell us why someone would ever want to make that up.
Right. Why would you?
You know what I'm saying? Like, for what purpose would I ever, that's what I always think. I'm like, you think Melissa Ohden gets up there and says all that she says because it's fun to do? Yeah. Nobody wants to have to do this. Right. But we have to do this. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting really passionate now.
Well, you see?
Just because it's,
That's why I said you have my blessing to rip your family a new one. I can't.
Yeah, it's challenging.
Or maybe I'll do it for you. You can call me next time you're with them.
I'll give them the link to the show.
Yeah. Well, one thing that interested me that Melissa Ohden said one time that I did not know. She said most abortion survivors don't bear physical injuries. Because most people think like an abortion survivor would have all these missing limbs or disfigurement.
Palsy,
Gianna Jessen, obviously, but she said most abortion survivors don't bear physical injuries from the attempt on their life.
Yeah.
But of course, the psychological and the mental and all of that, it's still the same experience for all abortion survivors. But a question that I always like to pose to pro-abortion supporters is, when there is someone who's missing an arm or a leg, right? The question is, were they harmed by that abortion? Were they wronged? Because most people who look at someone who's saying, yo, life's difficult for me because I only have one arm. Do you know why I only have one arm? Because the abortion attempt on my life failed. Most pro-abortion supporters would say that was wrong. But in which case, how could it be wrong? Because if they were wronged through that act, then all abortions are wrong.
Well, it's interesting on the, I always think about this, when I was in college, I read this article, and I think the pro-abortion movement is moving more and more toward this. I think they actually know it's a human life. You know what I mean?
Yes.
They 100%. They say the blob of tissue stuff. They rarely say it now.
We all know
actually.
we're killing babies.
Yeah, they know that now. It's really, what it is though is, they say this very clearly: the rights of the mother trump the rights of the baby. That's what they believe, and that's what they want the world to believe. That no matter what, even if it is killing a baby, it doesn't matter. But where do you draw the line with that?
Which is why I say it's no different than slavery, because when someone says it's her body, her choice, or when someone says the mother's right to bodily autonomy comes first, you know what they're saying, right, Sarah? They're just telling you that the baby is the mother's property.
Right.
That is synonymous with what they're saying.
Yes.
Well, well, not the first time we've called a class of human beings property. So as I often say, the Democrat Party once said that blacks were the property of plantation owners whose land they lived on. And now the same party says that babies are the property of their mothers whose bodies they live in. But where one is has no bearing on who one is. And when will we learn the stinking lesson that no person is property? So they view babies the same way that the plantation owners viewed black people.
Yeah.
It's indistinguishable.
Yeah. We're disposable.
Yeah.
It's very sad.
Yeah. So as we wind down, Sarah, we should talk about what happened on Capitol Hill last week.
Yes. So my congressman, Steve Scalise, we finally got a vote on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. And it was a 2020-2010 vote, which you would think, this is a common sense piece of legislation. This is about babies who survive abortions that are at this point outside of the womb. This is as common sense as someone could get. Every pro-abortion person in Congress should support this legislation. But of course, they're not going to. They're going to argue that's not necessary. They're going to argue that this never happens.
So let's do that. Let's play those arguments. I'll play devil's advocate right now. Sarah, this is just it's a Republican ploy to pull us into an argument about abortion. When listen, if infanticide doesn't happen, Sarah, this is ridiculous. Babies don't survive failed abortions. That's a Republican talking point. And if in the random rare case it happens, then that's why we had Bush's Born Alive Infant Protection Act. The baby is declared a person. This is just partisan politics. This doesn't happen. Nobody's killing babies that survive botched abortions. So why is this necessary? That's what they say too.
Right. First of all, and I was hoping to get to say this on Fox, is we know from Melissa's work and from the work of the Abortion Survivors Network that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and more come out all the time of abortion survivors, right? But you're going to tell me that saving just one life is not a good enough reason? Just one. Just my life. Just Melissa's life.
Right.
Isn't a good enough reason? Is that what the Democratic Party wants to tell me?
Right.
In Congress? Is that what they want to say?
Well, and Gosnell is the ultimate sort of comeback for any Democrat that would say this isn't happening. You're just making things up, scenarios up in order to accrue political power. That's kind of what they criticize the supporters of the bill for doing. It's like, no, we know that babies have been born alive during botched abortions and had their spinal cord snipped off.
And not only that, but they lived and suffered
before
they died.
Some of this is documented, right? Some of the work that Melissa's done.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and if you read the case with Gosnell, you can see in that report how horrifically he treated those babies' bodies and how they suffered before they died. So it's all their scheme to push it away and say it never happened.
How do you exercise restraint if you're ever in a room with or in close proximity to any member of the Democrats in the House of Representatives? Because by the way, why did I say that? Because last week, let's just update my listeners. Last week, they voted on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act once again. Every Democrat except one voted against it.
Correct.
And every Republican member of the House voted for it.
Correct. That's correct.
And what would it do? Correct me if I'm wrong. It would require any baby born alive during a botched abortion to be given medical treatment and care, just like any other baby at the same gestational age under similar circumstances. It requires that they immediately be transferred to a hospital.
Yes. Puts the duty on the physician.
Right, because shocker abortion centers aren't places of life. So they're not equipped to care for babies who survive the instruments that were intended to kill them. And then the bill has teeth, unlike Bush's.
Criminalization,
and so if an abortionist or abortion workers at a center don't adequately care for that child, they could be under criminal
Correct. That's
investigation and punishment as well.
Right.
Did I miss anything?
No, you got it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't know how you restrain yourself.
Yeah, I would say, my faith and what I believe about everyone should have be treated with dignity and respect, and those include people who are unfortunately working in the kingdom of darkness, is what I would call it. Yeah.
It is a wicked and depraved generation we live in. Yes. That is for sure. Yes. Pro-lifers and conservatives always get accused of the slippery slope argument. Mm-hmm. The old conservatives back when we had no-fault divorce laws, conservatives were saying, hey, if we have no-fault divorce laws, before we know it, we're going to have gay marriage. We're going to have thruples. We're going to have, predicting the downstream mm-hmm. results of the culture of death. And we're mocked and reviled and say, yeah, right. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing on the abortion fight, right? We say, hey, if you allow abortion, next thing you know, it'll be the infant.
Infanticide, yep.
Next thing, it'll be the elderly. And back when conservatives were saying that, we were mocked and reviled and called, tin hat wearing conspiracy theorists. Yeah, right. And now we have to ask, how far does this slippery slope go exactly? We're chopping up the genitalia of children who think they're the opposite gender, and we're forced to call that gender affirmation surgeries. Mm-hmm. We're chopping up children through point of birth, and under Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., refusing to do investigations into what we referred to earlier, which is kind of proof positive of partial birth abortions, which are illegal. So why aren't you willing to investigate that? Why? Because I think they all know that many abortionists are still doing illegal partial birth abortion,
Absolutely.
So they can't investigate it.
Of course
and now we're talking about babies who could be writhing on a hospital table or on a medical table, having just survived the abortion attempt on their life, and only one Democrat in the House of Representatives thinks that should be criminalized and those babies should be protected. Where does this slippery slope end, Sarah?
Right. We're here. We're at the, hopefully, I don't know what's next. Toddlers? I don't know. I really don't. And this is what I've seen and watching in the last 33 years, the abortion culture get worse and worse and worse and worse. Yeah. You begin to diminish the value of life in the womb at any point. You're going to diminish it outside the womb all the time. You're going to treat women like property. You're going to treat women and make them feel like this is the only solution for you. You actually can't succeed in life. You actually can't live without abortion. When what they really should be trying to do is help women get resources and be in relationships that are where they're treated with dignity and respect, and where they're not coerced into an abortion by a violent man or a man who has no interest in her care or preservation. But that's what happens. Absolutely.
So as we close down, Sarah, tell us a little bit about the work you do at Louisiana Right to Life. What does Louisiana Right to Life do?
Louisiana is very different than D.C. and New York and Colorado. We have, I work in the communications department and I run all of our communications. But in that process, we have done a lot of stuff with like the reversal of Roe, our trigger law, our 2022 trigger law, which effectively ended elective abortion in Louisiana when Roe was overturned, which was a huge victory for us. And ever since, it's been a real blur because it's just been nonstop. But Louisiana is a very interesting place. In Louisiana, we have pro-life Democrats, which is something that you don't see in many other. Jackson, a big hero of mine.
Yes, that's right. She's really the only. Oh, see, I was mixing her up with Ketanji. Ketanji Jackson is the new Supreme Court justice, right?
Oh, yes.
But then Katrina Jackson.
She's the one who authored
the black pro-life Democrat.
Correct. She authored some of our legislation.
Okay,
so
that's right.
it's tricky territory, but it's Louisiana's an amazing place because we have pro-life majorities in our legislature, which is rare, I would say, when it comes to party politics. So.
Yep. Yeah. Wow. Sarah, how can people connect with you, book you as a speaker, learn more about your story?
Yeah, absolutely. All my stuff is on sarahzagorski.com. I also was just published in the book Choose Life with Moody Publishers, and that came out last year. So they can look at that, or they can go to my website and they can see it there too.
Is it your book?
I'm a part of a book with Alveda King and some others. Yeah.
Cool. Wonderful. That's awesome. Yeah. Sarah Zagorski, Louisiana Right to Life. Do you do speaking as well?
I do. Often. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed keynoting banquets for pregnancy centers for years now.
Yes, it's wonderful, isn't it? It's a gift.
And seeing the work they do all around the country, and my mother was directing one of those centers when she was pregnant with me in 1991 in LA County. And they have, I believe pregnancy centers have increased by about 80% from the 1980s to today.
That's awesome.
And we outnumber abortion centers more than 2 to 1. And yet most people are not even aware of the work that they do.
Right.
So guys, book Sarah as a speaker for your event, bring her to your church, conference. We need your story and so many others like you to be told, to be platformed. I mean, abortion survivors should be on, in my opinion, should be on every podcast of anyone that calls themselves a conservative, whether that's Daily Wire or Glenn Beck or The Blaze. I mean, like people should be begging for you to come and tell your stories, because it's the side of the story that's never told. Right. It's always, the babies that died. Right. So we either mourn the babies that died, or if you're pro-choice, you're celebrating the mother's right for the dead babies. But no one will listen to the stories of people who say, I barely made it out alive. Yeah. And here I am.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for telling your story, Sarah. We appreciate it. Stay bold, okay?
I will.
Stay fearless. Like I said, I can't imagine how I would lose my mind. Knowing my personality, it would be very hard to restrain myself from these people who could not be more evil, screaming at you that you should be dead. Right. And we're hoping to find some of those people on the sidewalk this week while we're in DC.
Yes, absolutely.
Nothing brings me more joy than being like Elijah on the hill with the prophets of Baal. Yes. And after God rains down fire from heaven, going up to the prophets of Baal and going, so where's your God? Is he, and Elijah literally says to the prophets of Baal, is he relieving himself? Like, is he on the toilet? Like, I think we need more of that kind of like confidence in the church today. We do. To say, here is our God. Where is your puny little God? And we should have that kind of confidence being on the right side of this, because these are babies, these are human beings, these are children. And if we won't be their voice, then not only who will be their voice, but what does that do to us, to our soul? For being silent in this Holocaust. So
we can't be silent.
Yeah. No. Amen. Well, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
Keep up the good work. Thanks for joining the show today, guys. Head on over to iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Give the show a rating and review. Let us know what you think. SarahZagorski.com. SarahZagorski.com. Go check. Very easy to remember, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. Go check out her website. Book her. Get as many abortion survivors booked to tell their stories as possible, and reshare this episode with your pro-choice friends. Send this to pro-choice Uncle Bob. Send this to your family members and friends who believe that it is a woman's fundamental right to have murdered Sarah here, who's sitting right in front of me. See, that's how we push back, is the babies who barely survived, boldly telling their stories in the public square and looking the culture of death in the eye, and refusing to back down. So help their stories get out there, contribute to her ministry, her speaking ministry, Louisiana Right to Life. And we'll continue coming at you with wonderful conversations, interviews with pro-life leaders here in Washington, D.C. 2023, the first March for Life since the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Until next time, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is Unaborted.